Yeah, for now, some of you have asked how we make our biochar. So first about why do we make biochar? And there could be various reasons. One of them is you want to burn biomass easily that is too hard and gnarly to chip, like that stuff here. That would be really hard getting it through a chipper. So we selected it out. And today I'm making biochar because it's in the way. I want to chip this other pile of biomass over there, which is much nicer for chipping. It's fresher, it's softer, it's not so awkward. So you can use all these awkward orchard pruning, for instance, which you want to get rid of quickly because they have disease. You don't want to put them back in the garden necessarily. You make biochar with them, that sterilizes them. But rather than burning it down all the way to ash, like you see here on the surface, you keep on loading into it, so you get a really large amount of embers, and you keep piling it on. So we just had lunch, and I neglected it a bit, so there's too much ash, so I have to put another layer on to stop it burning further down, because we want the biochar, and we want the biochar made quite hot. So all the volatile components, the tars and vinegars, have been evaporated out. That makes a good biochar. And then when you have that, then it's ready to be quenched. We're going to use some liquid later on to douse it, and that stops it from burning down further. So then we got this biochar that's wet, that's soaking up all sort of nutrients, and then we can crush it or use it as it is in planting holes, for instance, or put it into the goat stable, or use it in our garden beds. And what it does is it acts like an instantly made humus that we can make in quite large quantities very fast, with all the functions that humus has. That is holding water in the soil, letting water infiltrate easy into the soil, making the soil lighter so roots can penetrate better in our clay soil. It holds on to nutrients in some ways better than clay does. It has a high cation exchange capacity and a high anion exchange capacity. The second one is something that the clay doesn't have. So it works like a buffer in the soil to absorb and release water, absorb and release certain gases, absorb and release nutrients. And that also stops our soils from being pollutant to our waterways by releasing nutrients like nitrates and so on into the waterways. Charcoal can hang on to that, and it stops it from getting lost for us. So we save on nutrients that we don't have to replace because they're not washed out by the rain. So these are all interesting reasons why we want to do biochar. And another one is, if we would burn it down to ash, all the carbon that was accumulated by the wood will be going back to the atmosphere very fast. If we turn it into char, it will be arrested in the crystalline carbon structure of the biochar for hundreds, thousand years, or maybe 10,000 of years. We don't really know, but we do know it stays in for a very long time, which means it doesn't go back to the atmosphere. But being then redistributed in the soil as ground up biochar, it has the function that we expect from carbon in the soil, which is being structural, being a sponge, and to some degree slowly but surely feeding certain microbes, and in the time being, as it is resident in the soil, housing microbes. Especially fungi get encouraged by a certain level of biochar in the soil, and that's what we want. We want to encourage fungal life, mycorrhizae, free-living fungi, all these guys, because they help us. So what the biochar is in the soil is like a catalyzer rather than a fertilizer. Of course, it comes also with all this ash that acts very fast as a fertilizer. There's a lot of potash in there, there's magnesium in there, there's calcium in there. Very easy release nutrients, but that's not really what we understand as the fertility enhancing effect of biochar, which is something that lasts long beyond the leaching out of the ashes and does something in the soil almost forever as a catalyzer that facilitates certain reaction in the soil, increases the soil life, yeah, it encourages more diversity in the soil, and it increases the metabolism in the soil. However, it doesn't burn up organic matter as fast as soil without biochar. So these are all very interesting things. It's a new science still. So far it has shown to be mostly beneficial. Sometimes it's neutral. Sometimes, especially initial applications, under certain circumstances, it can even have a slight negative effect. But overall, so far the studies show that the average would be a 10% increase in crop yield overall. So that's something, you repeat that every year without further putting in biochar, that's a pretty good deal, yeah? But to make it easy, we don't buy anything special. We use this old bathtub here. We pile in the stuff, and I'm going to put some more in now, because what we need now, we need a flame curtain. These techniques, as we're doing here, it's called a flame curtain. So we need a flame to burn the oxygen away before it can reach the embers. So the air would come in from the side, it gets sucked in, because here we have updraft. So the heat takes the air up, the new air comes in over the edge like so, but rather than going down into the embers where it could oxidize them or burn them completely, it actually just comes in and oxidizes with the flames and goes up. And that starves the embers of oxygen, and therefore they're not burning down completely. They have enough heat to drive out all these things we don't want in the char, like vinegars and tars. We don't want them, and you need that heat. You need a good heat to drive them out. A charcoal that's made with low heat, like 200 degrees, 250, 300 degrees, that's too low for us. It doesn't work that well. We need high temperature to get clean biochar, to get the tars out of it, because these tars would actually be bad for soil life. Yeah, they're antiseptic. We don't want them. And so we want clean char, and then we charge it up with a liquid that has certain nutrients in it. But at the moment we are still in the heating process, make biochar. Of course there are some designs that yield maybe more biochar from the wood that you throw in, but they cost a lot of money. They oxidize very fast with the heat and the metal together. And all we care about here now is cheap, easy to use, and handy. So that's what we got with the bathtub. So I'm going to load it up again. So you see now the flame curtain is in action now. The air would come in like so, go down here, but gets up immediately without touching the embers. It just gets drawn right through, and that keeps the air away from the embers, and therefore oxygen starve, and they don't burn completely down to ash in a hurry. Yeah, and you can see, you can pile it up like so. It's very awkward stuff like that. You wouldn't want to put it through chipper when it's dry. You wouldn't want to make it into firewood. So we have taken out usable firewood. We have taken out wood that you can chip easily, and we were left with a fairly small pile of awkward stuff that we rather burn. And when we applied it earlier in the garden, about something like 10 years ago, we did one bed with 1 bucket of biochar per square meter, 18 liter bucket of biochar per square meter, and the control was nothing. And year after year we would grow in winter a crop of garlic on it. the beds that were amended with what we now would recognize as a pretty lousy biochar consistently came up with 10% higher yield for the one application. So that effect carries on because, as I said before, it's a catalyzer, not a fertilizer. So the catalyzer is still in the ground and it does its function as fertilizers flow through the system. So therefore, biochar is, in my opinion, a very worthwhile investment. If it does 10% a year for a single application, that sounds pretty good if you want to stay in the place for a while. So there's a hell of a heat coming out of that one. Some people make a more permanent setup like that and use the off heat to heat a greenhouse. And once it's a bit further burned down, a bit more controllable, you could grill on it. You could use it for all sorts of things as well, but at least it's a fire to stand around and, you know, enjoy a campfire as you make biochar at the same time. That's how we do it. Now you see the white on the wood is dominating over black, and now is the time to put more wood on it, otherwise we lose too much char in the dough. So now is the time to put another layer on, but we run out of stuff, we're done for the day. So we're just going to wait for that to burn down a bit, and then we put some quenching liquid on that we made with seaweed water. Now it's quenching time. All burned down. You see there's a lot of char in there, and we do quench in order to arrest it right here so it doesn't keep on going, and you have to put a lot of water on it, otherwise you come back tomorrow and notice that oops, it didn't die down, the whole thing is gone, sort of thing. It happened before. So ideally the liquid that you use has some organic form of nitrogen in it. Urine would be the best, a clear natural nitrogen solution, and otherwise some chicken manure mixed up in water, something similar. In this case we used also water from seaweed, so there will be some other nutrients that get locked into the charcoal now. But the important thing is the nitrogen, apparently, because it can form something on the surface which makes the whole char, the biochar effect in the soil much more pronounced. If you want to follow up any information on that, look up Ithaca Institute. They did a lot of experiments with that. So I'm starting to quench now. So first I just dump a bucket on it. We want it just in one spot. We don't want it on the surface. We want it going down and then up rather. That has a better effect. So I'm going to do that now. As the water enters into the biochar pores and they're still hot inside, then it turns into water vapor, which is much higher volume than the liquid, and it can't get out easy. So it starts popping those pores open a bit further, and that way we achieve a bit more an effect like activated charcoal. That is similarly done with steam, high temperature, or sometimes using chemicals, which we of course don't want to do. So the biochar has a reasonably big outside surface, but compared to sand or even clay, it has a huge, easily accessible inner surface area that is 1,000 times or more the size of the outside surface of the biochar. And once that is made conducive to life, we want to wash the charcoal out afterwards so it's not so alkaline inside, and maybe we want to soak it further with seaweed water because we will flush all of that out again. Then once the biochar is neutral, more or less, and it has some nutrients in it, then microbes will rush in to live inside. Yeah. If the tar has gone, if we make biochar, things that are just left over from a low temperature campfire or barbecue charcoal is often made with fairly low temperatures that are not good enough for what we want to use it for. And we have a lot of residual tar in the pores, and that will inhibit bacteria and fungi from going in there until that has weathered out of the char, and it can take quite a few years. We try to accelerate that process by using high temperature and then cleaning the biochar, rinsing it, and then ideally grinding it so it becomes more manageable and these inside surface areas are more accessible right away. Then what do we use mostly for biochar? Usually wood that is not so good for using as raw chipwood. Yeah, for instance, resinous woods like macrocarpa, tea tree and so on. We rather make biochar out of them than chipping them as mulch. And another interesting fact is that rotten wood, as long as it is dry and turns into biochar fairly easy, that really makes a nice biochar structure that's quite soft. It crumbles easy, has big pores, because fungi have already worked into that wood, opening up certain channels further, and then we freeze that by making it into biochar, and it crumbles really easy, so you don't need a chipper or shredder of any sort to crumble it down. Another easy one to use, and also an excellent biochar, is made from bamboo. So bamboo and any rotten wood would be my ideal pick for biochar material. You don't even have to put it through a machine afterwards, it just crumbles into the size you need. Otherwise we use a garden shredder for it. You don't want to do it too dry, it makes a horrible dust cloud. If it's too wet, it clogs up the shredder, so you have to find the sort of right moisture content to do that. But the garden shredder works really well for that. And then you can make it so small and uniform, you can sift it. And if it is made in a clean way, you're absolutely sure there's no other contaminants in there, no treated wood that entered the stream or bits of metal or anything like that, then the crushed up dust you could also feed to your animals. And we do that, we feed it to chickens in their mesh, we feed it to goats when we give them these sort of little teasers in the morning for milking. We put some charcoal in, and cows get it, and they will spread it for us into the paddocks, and then the dung beetles and the worms, they will eat it together with the manure and pull it down into the ground and deposit it deep down where it gets mixed with the humus that is forming from it. And that is a really easy way of getting it out into places you don't want to carry it to, and incorporate it in the most beneficial way. And it keeps your animals healthy as well. It has certain health benefits. You don't want to do it forever, non-stop. You might want to do a phase of it, and then you stop for a while, you do a phase of it. But it helps the digestion for animals and humans, of course. It seems to reduce parasite burden, and in ruminants it reduces the methane exhalation that we would find with any animal that has rumen. So, and not forget again the carbon sequestration that happens when we put that into the soil. Yeah, each kilogram of dry biochar that we incorporate in the soil is equivalent of 2.5 kg or liters of petrol that you have burned somewhere or another. You can offset it by burying 1 kilogram of dry biochar in the soil. That would have the same amount of carbon. But of course the best thing would be not to burn the petrol, but still bury the biochar in the soil, because as I mentioned earlier, year after year you could achieve a 10 to 15, in some cases even higher crop yields because of a one-time application of biochar. And then don't worry about it, you don't have to incorporate all at once. You do that in the planting hole for a tree. There's only one way of putting it in, down deep, it's the first time. but in a market garden you can keep on putting it in, ideally through your compost, in an ongoing way, and it improves every time. And in fact, it is better putting it in bit by bit rather than all in one go. Far better. Sometimes slower is faster. And here you've seen it doesn't take a special gizmo to do that. Anyone can find an old bathtub. It works really well because it's long for logs to put in, or long twigs. So no reason to have something like that in your backyard to burn wood that is just too awkward for anything else. And we found that is for us one of the most effective ways of making biochar on a bigger scale. We also have a small kitchen sink for smaller scale. We might show you another time, and then we cook on it as well. Yeah, so all this heat is used for something as well. But anyway, that's how we make biochar. That's how we do it.